Well, the South African Defence Force continues to make headlines. Its chief, General Rudzani Maphwanya, sparked a diplomatic controversy after making statements in support of Iran during a visit. President Ramaphosa chose not to take any action against the general. Additionally, there was a security breach at the Waterkloof Air Force Base, raising further concerns about the Defence Force state of readiness and security. Well, with me in the studio is Kobus Marais, an independent defence analyst. Kobus, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Linda. Always a pleasure and a privilege to join you and your viewers.
Well, it seems that the Defence Force and it seemed to be out of step with what's happening on the international terrain. While South Africa is trying to improve its relations with Washington, it seems that they're just doing their own thing. And now the general, the one who went to Iran, which is General Rudzani Maphwanya, was cleared by Mr. Ramaphosa, where many people thought he should have stepped down. So your thoughts?
Well, yes. I've always held the view, and I think this is basically from our constitution, that the South African National Defence Force must be a tool in our foreign relations policy and practices. So in other words, what that means is that whatever the Defence Force does should not and must not be contradictory or controversial to what our international relations challenges are and our international trade challenges are, and they should work together in synchronization to make sure that we achieve whatever is the best for South Africa. Whether they in person agrees with that view is irrelevant, because this is not a game of personal choices or preferences, but it is what is in the best interests of South Africa and what needs to be done. Now, as I understand it, there was already last year, General Maphwanya seek authority from the Minister of Defence, who at that stage, one must acknowledge, knew little to nothing of what is going on in the Defence Force and the role of the Defence Force. So it's maybe a bit of a soft target area that General Maphwanya, who is the chief of the South African National Defence Force and the highest officer of the Defence Force, should have known and should have taken into account. Now clearly, what General Maphwanya has allegedly said and what he has expressed in Iran seems to be a personal view and that of ANC members in South Africa. That is irrelevant, because whatever he must do in the Defence Force should be in support of the Department of International Relations and Trade and both departments. And in that regard, we all are aware of the challenges with America, the trade policies, and the solutions that must be sought to solve that and to make sure that we get preferential treatment again, so that we can create jobs and grow our economy. And ironically, only through economic growth will there be more money available to appropriate to the Defence Force. And we all know that it is totally inappropriate and insufficient how they have provided for funding to the South African National Defence Force. Now, at 0.7% and less of GDP, of a low GDP, remember, so it's a two-edged sword that we need more money in South Africa before we can even expect more money to the Defence Force. The Defence Force, in my opinion, is probably underfunded by between 30 and 50 billion rand. So that's why I've always believed that we should at least have 1% of GDP, and we should strive for 1.5% of GDP. So in other words, we are enormously underfunded, and we see that in the Air Force, we see that in the Navy, we see that in the whole of the Defence Force, that budget and money is an integral integrated part of what needs to be done to save the Defence Force. What I have experienced in my time in Parliament, and specifically in the Portfolio Committee of Defence and Military Veterans and the Joint Standing Committee on Defence, is that there are so many factions, not only in politics, but in the Defence Force as well. We know that all of the senior staff members, that's probably 90% plus of the Military Command Council, are all ex-MK members. So in other words, we all know it's a reality that their sentiment is with the ANC. Now, they should do as they preached. And that is what General Maphwanya has done not long ago in the official publication of the Defence Force, where he wrote an article speaking directly to all uniform members to tell them they should not get involved with party politics. They should be apolitical. The Defence Force in the uniform members don't take political sides. They serve the government of the day. And, they should refrain from policy issues, all of those things. And ironically, he has made himself, culpable of transgressing those same rules when he visited Iran in a very, very sensitive time. We know that Iran is probably the biggest warfare threat, an enemy of the United States and their allies, especially in the Middle East. So to choose to go to Iran openly by the National Defence Force is a bad taste. It's poor judgment, and it is testimony of the lack of proper leadership and objective leadership in the Defence Force. Now, I've always held the view in the past that the biggest challenge that we've got with the Defence Force, yes, it's money, but it's more leadership, specifically management leadership. In other words, General Maphwanya and his staff, senior staff especially, who must give the lead from the front and must give the guidance, and obviously political leadership as well, which is the Minister of Defence and the President as the Commander-in-Chief. Now, clearly, what has happened is that General Maphwanya, remember, he is a Venda, and he comes from the same traditional area as the Commander-in-Chief. So, and I think that had, in my opinion, had played a huge role when he appointed him as the chief of the SANDF. So whether there are political alliances, one can only guess. But I think what has happened is that the minister, obviously, in my opinion, was not strong enough to openly criticize him. After her department was the first one to come out when, all the publications came out and the clips came out of what he apparently said in Iran. Her ministry distanced themselves from what he has said. Second was Durko, and third was the presidency, who said that was in bad choice. They were not aware of that, and they also distanced themselves from that. So what I also gather and can safely assume is that there was no proper briefings before he went to Iran. So one would expect that there must be briefings with the minister, and the minister must seek the involvement of Durko, the presidency, and trade and industry, because all of those things can impact on any perception of our position, from a foreign relations point of view. Now, all of them were aware of the struggles with regards to the tariffs negotiations with the United States, and it was in an incredible sensitive situation and a timing that was also subsequent to the visit of by the president and his delegation to the White House. So the Minister of Trade and Industry and Economic Development, they were hard busy negotiating and trying to forge a deal. So, all of this seems very strange. But, as I've always said, and I've maintained that whenever the president specifically talks and says something, you must first determine who was his audience. In other words, to whom has he said what? Because that can change depending on who's the audience. So so it's not strange. It's sad, but it's not strange to me that there are no consequences. In my time, both two ministers that I have worked with always were talking about consequences and consequence management. There's absolutely zero consequences and zero consequence management. That's why that's a bad example to the Defence Force and especially uniform members, but also the Department of Defence, saying that, leadership can do whatever they want to, irrespective of how they are damaging the image and opportunities of South Africa and the citizens. If your relationships is fine and there are, mutual benefits to both, then, nothing will happen. One must also remember that General Maphwanya is very close to his retirement age. Now, he should have retired at 60. That period was extended to 65, and I think within a month or two he will be 65. So I've also speculated in the past that maybe they will not do anything, because to start with court-martial, for instance, or even a disciplinary process in the military court system will take so long that he will be out of the Defence Force by the time those institutions can sit and consider the case. Now, obviously, neither a military court or a court-martial cannot determine what happens to a civilian. And if you're not a serving member anymore, then you are a civilian. So that means it's actually a fruitless exercise to do it that way. But I think what should have happened is that, a suspension, and maybe some form of punishment. But that would have been more I think a sign of their determination to make sure that, there are few faults being made and that people are held accountable. But, in reality, quite the opposite is true. And I understand that has caused ramifications, specifically in the USA. And they can talk about replacing America, but you don't replace a market like that. They couldn't have even replaced that over the last 30 plus years of democracy. So how are you going to replace America as probably the second or the maximum third biggest trading partner from the perspective of earning foreign currency? Remember, China is a major trading partner, but we've got a negative trade balance with them. With America, we've got a positive trade balance. With the European Union, we've got a positive trade balance. And with the UK, we've got a positive trade balance. So from that perspective, and growing the economy and looking for foreign exchange to help and fund our requirements and needs, those three markets are crucial. And neither Russia nor China can replace that anytime soon. So it is very important, and that's why General Maphwanya should have known about that. He should have taken that into account, and that certainly will be part of his legacy when he retires, and that is unfortunately, part of the image or the perception of very, very poor leadership in the Defence Force.
Kobus, can we move on to the unauthorized vehicle that crashed its way through the gate at the Air Force Base, Waterkloof? So what is your take on that?
Irrespective of the criminality in and around any military base, specifically Air Force Base Waterkloof, irrespective of that, you should have proper and very effective security and control mechanisms. So there should never, ever be a situation that someone can crash through the gates at Waterkloof. The security should be of such a nature that, there will be backups, there will be stages of entering. So if they crash through the first barriers, the second barrier should stop them, and there should be people that will be intervening. So, so criminality we know, and we know that there's been a number of cases where ammunition and weapons were, just vanished at the military bases, and in some cases, like you remember a couple of years ago at Littleton, where it was actually stolen, and it was later used in for the wrong purposes. What we should have is that at any base, similar to our national borders, whether it's air, sea, or land, that we should have proper protection and security and safety mechanisms. Now, we have got the manpower. There's no doubt that there's more than enough manpower in the Defence Force, because majority of the members of the Defence Force are not eligible to be deployed to, for instance, the DRC or Mozambique or for any other purpose. So in other words, you can use them. The layman sick, you can even use them at the gate. So in my time, when I was when I was in the army, there was always guard duty, and there was a roster, and everybody was part of guard duties. But that is again discipline in a defence force, and at any base. I mean, we can talk about the two ammunition depots at Jan Kempdorp and the R, where they store old ammunition and some that is not being used anymore. So, even there, the security is so bad. Look at Silver Mine, where, that's supposed to be our most critical and strategic communication facilities in the Defence Force. There are no fences anymore, so everything gets stolen. And if the fences and the perimeters are stolen by criminals, then the next thing is they steal the antennas. So if they steal the antennas and the cables, then obviously you've got no communication whatsoever. So it's part of a much bigger problem, and a way of how the Defence Force look after their own critical infrastructure and equipment. I know that there are in so many cases there are outdated equipment, there are broken equipment, there are poorly maintained equipment, and to a large extent that is due to the budget constraints. However, irrespective of your budget constraints, then you have to make sure that with the manpower that you have at your disposal, that you can fill the gaps, and just at the Waterkloof Air Force Base, there's no doubt that they should have had more than enough security guards and normal guards to make sure. Because what will happen next? Next will happen. They will cut a fence at the site of Air Force Base Waterkloof, and they will just enter that. I mean, it's just unacceptable. But that is part of the symptoms of the dilapidation of the Defence Force and its defence capabilities.
Well, is this all due to budget constraints?
No, certainly budget constraints plays a major and significant role, but it's not. It's management and its priorities. Political as well, but it's predominantly management, and one will have to start at Air Force Base Waterkloof, the officer commanding, and his senior staff, and who was supposed to be responsible for that, the chief of the SANDF and the minister should have jumped on all the senior guys to make sure. The chief of the Air Force, all of them should be up in arms about what is happening there, because if that is a symptom of what can happen, we've got bases where a lot of prime machine equipment is in storage, in poor storage conditions, And if we lose the availability of those prime mission equipment, then we are even in a worse situation than I think most of us think we are.
Well, Kobus Marais, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, Linda. It's always a pleasure, and best wishes to you and your viewers.